The marble floor of the Caldwell Museum caught the light from 200 chandeliers. And in the center of all that light, a torn invitation lay in pieces at a young black woman's feet. She did not flinch. She bent down, slowly, picked up both halves, stood back up, and looked the woman in the burgundy gown directly in the eyes. "Get her out," Diana Hargrove said. Her voice carried across the hall. Security now. The young woman still did not move. "You tore my invitation," she said. Quiet, clear, almost gentle, in front of 250 people. Diana stepped closer. "You don't belong here. $100,000 a year says otherwise." The room went silent. Diana's smile didn't waver. "I don't care who you think your father is." The young woman reached into her clutch, not for ID, not for her wallet, for her phone. "That's exactly why I'm calling him right now." The invitation was already in pieces when Naomi Carter decided she was not going to cry. Two halves. Clean tear. Gold lettering split right down the middle. The Caldwell crest separated from itself like something that had never been meant to hold together. The pieces were on the marble floor and the woman who had torn them was still standing there, waiting for a reaction. And Naomi looked at those two pieces for exactly 3 seconds before she made her decision. She bent down. Slowly, carefully. The way you move when you want every person in the room to understand that you are not rushing, that you are not rattled, that you have all the time in the world and none of their urgency belongs to you. She picked up both halves. She stood back up, and she held the torn invitation in her palm and looked at Diana Hargrove with the clearest, steadiest eyes Diana had probably seen in a very long time. That was the moment. That was where it started. Not with the tearing, which was just cruelty doing what cruelty does when it has an audience, but with what came after. With a 27-year-old woman standing on cold marble in a simple black dress, holding the pieces of something that had been destroyed and not breaking, not even close. Go back 90 minutes before the tearing, before the phones went up and the circle formed and the evening became something that 250 people would spend the next 12 months trying to explain to themselves. Go back to 7:42 p.m. The Caldwell Museum of Art sat on Fifth Avenue the way it always had: stone columns, iron doors, wide entrance lit gold against the October sky. Inside, the annual charity gala was already humming. White linen tables, crystal chandeliers, a string quartet in the far corner working through something that sounded like Brahms but quieter. 250 guests in various configurations of designer and tailored, moving through the main hall with the specific ease of people who had been attending events like this one for long enough that they no longer needed to think about how to behave. The Caldwell Gala was $10,000 a seat. It benefited the museum's community arts programs. It had been running for 16 years. It was the kind of event that appeared in the social pages the following morning, with photographs of people holding champagne flutes and smiling at each other with their full faces. Naomi Carter stepped through the iron doors at 7:42 p.m. and paused just inside the entrance. She was wearing a black dress, simple cut, thin straps, hemline at the knee, small gold studs in her ears, the kind that catch light just enough to notice and not enough to announce, low heels, a clutch bag that fit in one hand. She looked composed. She looked purposeful. She looked like a woman who had decided exactly what she wanted to wear and had spent approximately 0 minutes second-guessing the decision. She picked up a glass of water from a passing tray. Not champagne. Water. She stood there for a moment and looked at the room the way you look at something you are trying to understand before you engage with it. Not nervously. Not tentatively. With the quiet attentiveness of someone who had been trained, by years of work in rooms that did not always want her in them, to read a situation before she walked into the center of it. Carter Foundation had 3 tables tonight. Table 7 near the east window. Table 11, near the south wall, and the smaller overflow table, Table 14, near the corridor entrance. The foundation's name was printed on small gold placards at each one. $100,000 per year for 3 consecutive years, platinum sponsor. One of 6 at that level in the entire event. Naomi's father, Elliot Carter, was supposed to be here. He had planned to attend. He had cleared his evening, confirmed the car service, told Naomi he would meet her in the lobby at 7:15. Then a board situation in Chicago had escalated at 4 in the afternoon, the kind of escalation that does not care about your social calendar. And he had called her at 5 with that particular steadiness in his voice that meant he was managing multiple things simultaneously and needed her to be one of the things that did not need managing. She had told him to stay. Handle it. She would represent the foundation. It was not the first time. It would not be the last. Naomi was 27 years old and had been deputy director of Carter Foundation for 2 years. Before that, she had spent 3 years working in grant administration at 2 different non-profit organizations in New York, learning the work from the ground up rather than from the top of her father's company down. Elliot had been clear about that. If you want to run something one day, he had told her when she was 22, you have to know what it costs to do the actual work, not the vision, the work. So she knew the work. She also knew how to walk into a room full of people and find what she needed to find. And tonight, what she needed to find was a read on the Hargrove family, because in 72 hours, Elliot Carter was scheduled to sign an $800 million partnership agreement with Hargrove Capital, and Naomi had a question she could not answer from a file. The question was simple. It was also the most important question you could ask about any organization before you committed to doing business with them. Who are these people when they think no one important is watching? So she was here, watching, not announcing herself, not working the room, just moving through it quietly, glass of water in hand, observing. The Hargroves were not difficult to find. They occupied a cluster of space near the center of the hall, with the unconscious confidence of people who had never once needed to calculate whether they were welcome somewhere. Gerald Hargrove, 57, CEO of Hargrove Capital, stood with his jacket open and his shoulders at the particular angle of a man who was physically present but mentally somewhere else. He had the look of someone who had been handsome in his 30s and had arrived at 57, with enough of it left to still register. Gray at the temples, a watch that cost more than most people's cars. He kept touching the phone in his jacket pocket, not taking it out, just touching it, like a person who needed to know it was there. His wife, Diana Hargrove, was 54 and had not changed her hair in 15 years. Champagne blonde, set in careful waves that looked effortless because considerable effort had been applied to make them look that way. She wore a gown the color of dark burgundy with long sleeves and a neckline that managed to be both tasteful and deliberate. She was the center of the cluster and she knew it, and arranged herself accordingly, the angle of her body, the direction of her laugh, the way she touched the arm of the person she was speaking, to just long enough to signal ownership of the moment. Diana was the kind of woman who had learned, early and thoroughly, that a room was something you could possess if you understood the architecture of attention. She had been possessing rooms for 30 years. She was very good at it. Colton Hargrove, their son, stood to his mother's left, 26 years old, with the jaw of someone who had been told he was attractive so many times that he had stopped needing the information and started simply operating from it. He was half watching the room and half watching his phone screen, scrolling with the low-grade distraction of someone whose attention was never fully located in the same place as their body. He had 83,000 TikTok followers. He had gotten most of them by posting what he called reality content footage of situations he found amusing with commentary framed as entertainment. Brielle Hargrove, 24, stood to her father's right in pale gold. She had her mother's coloring and her father's height and an Instagram account with 412,000 followers built around a specific aesthetic aspirational living, luxury access, the visual language of a life curated for consumption. She was beautiful in the particular way that happens when resources are applied consistently and early. Tonight she had photographed her bag 3 times before leaving the car and was composing a caption for the 4th photograph in her head. Naomi watched the Hargrove family for approximately 4 minutes. She watched the way Diana managed the space around her, the way Gerald touched his phone and did not take it out, the way Colton's attention drifted, the way Brielle angled herself toward light sources automatically, the way a plant does, with the unconscious optimization of something that has been doing it for years. She was forming an opinion. She was always forming opinions in rooms like this. It was the work. You could read a company's financials and their employee reviews and their public statements and their philanthropic record, and you would learn things, real things, useful things. But you could not learn from any of those documents the thing that Naomi's father had told her was the most important thing to know. How people treat others when the stakes feel low. The stakes always feel low until they don't. At 7:51 p.m., Naomi drifted closer to the east window. Table 7. The Carter Foundation placard caught the chandelier light. She looked at it briefly. Then she looked back at the room. At 7:54 p.m., she stopped at the silent auction table along the south wall and read a description card for a piece of sculpture. She was not particularly interested in the sculpture. She was standing at an angle from which she could observe the Hargrove cluster without appearing to observe it. Gerald's phone buzzed. She could not hear it from across the room, but she saw him reach into his pocket and look at the screen and put it back. His expression did not change in any dramatic way, but something in the set of his shoulders adjusted by a degree. She noted that. At 7:58 p.m., Diana Hargrove looked across the room and found Naomi. Naomi did not know exactly when the looking started. She became aware of it the way you become aware of weather, not suddenly but gradually, the slow accumulation of a feeling into a certainty. She looked up from the auction card she was reading, and Diana was already looking at her with an expression that was not yet hostile and not yet anything specific. Just the sharp, rapid appraisal that certain people perform on certain other people in certain rooms. Head to toe. Dress, shoes, clutch, earrings, hair, no escort. Alone the evaluation took less than 4 seconds, and then something shifted behind Diana's eyes. A decision made. A category assigned. Naomi watched it happen. She had seen it happen before. The particular micro-expression of a person was decided they know who you are before you have said a single word. The small tightening around the eyes that means the conclusion has been reached and the rest of the interaction is just administrative. She held Diana's gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the auction card. She heard the footsteps crossing the marble floor before she saw Diana arrive. Diana walked with purpose. Not quickly, there was nothing frantic about it. The purposeful stride of a woman who had decided something and was proceeding at her own pace, because she had never once felt the need to rush toward anything. She stopped 2 feet from Naomi. "I'm sorry." The voice was warm. Practiced warmth, the kind built from decades of social situations requiring the performance of concern. "I don't think I recognize you. Are you with one of the auction sponsors?" Naomi turned to face her fully. She did not take a step back. She did not adjust her posture. She stood where she was standing and looked at Diana Hargrove and said, calmly, "Carter Foundation. I'm here on behalf of my father, Elliot Carter. He couldn't make it tonight." "Carter Foundation." Diana repeated it. The 2 words moved through her mouth like she was tasting something unfamiliar. "And you have an invitation." Naomi reached into her clutch. She produced the invitation clean white card. Gold embossed lettering. The Caldwell crest at the top, and held it out. Diana took it, and she looked at it. Naomi watched her look at it, watched her eyes move across the text, watched the small performance of scrutiny that was not actually scrutiny but theater, because Diana was not looking at the invitation to verify it. She had made her decision before she crossed the room. She was looking at it to buy time and create atmosphere. "I'm going to need to verify this," Diana said. To no one in particular. To the general space around Naomi's left shoulder. "That's fine," Naomi said. Diana turned slightly and signaled Colton with a single look. The look said, "Come here." The look also said, "Bring your phone." Colton had been watching from the moment his mother started crossing the room. He was already moving. He was already holding his phone at the low, practiced angle of someone who had been filming in public spaces for years, and had learned exactly how to do it in a way that looked casual, but wasn't. He opened TikTok. He typed a caption in 4 seconds. He pressed record. The timestamp on the video would later read 7:58 p.m. "Guys," he said, low enough that the nearest guests could hear, but not quite low enough that it was actually private. "You're going to want to stay with me for this one." He had no idea. He had genuinely, completely, catastrophically no idea what he was starting. Brielle had her phone out before Colton finished his second sentence. Instagram. She opened a live stream with the fluency of someone who had been doing it so long it had become reflex. She whispered to her early viewers, 11 people at first, then 23, the number climbing okay. "So something is happening at the gala tonight, and I'm going to let you guys see it." The coordinator assigned to the east section of the gala appeared at Diana's elbow. Young woman, clipboard, lanyard with the Caldwell logo. She had heard the exchange and was moving toward them with the controlled urgency of someone whose job required her to resolve things before they became things. She looked at the invitation in Diana's hand. She looked at her clipboard. She began to say something. Diana did not wait. She turned back to Naomi. The practiced warmth in her voice had dropped a register. What was underneath it was quieter and harder, and considerably more honest. "I think there's been a mistake," she said. "These events are invitation only. The list is very specific. The committee curates it carefully, and I've been on this committee for 6 years. I know our donors, I know our sponsors, and I'm sorry, but I simply do not." "The invitation is real," Naomi said. Her voice had not changed at all. Same register, same pace. "Carter Foundation is a platinum sponsor of tonight's event. Our table is near the east window, third from the left. We've sponsored this gala for 3 consecutive years." Diana looked at her, a long look. The kind of look that is actually a statement dressed up as observation. "Platinum sponsor," she repeated, and the way she said it communicated with surgical precision that she found the claim implausible and was too polished to say so directly. $100,000 per year, Naomi said, steady, informational, like she was reading from a document rather than defending herself in a circle that was already beginning to form. "You can confirm it with Dr. Voss, or with the event coordinator who's standing right there." The coordinator looked at her clipboard again. She found something. Her expression shifted. "Mrs. Hargrove," she started. "It's fine, Sarah," Diana said, without looking at her. "I'll handle this." And then she looked back at Naomi's invitation, and she did the thing, both hands. A clean pull. The paper tore with a sound that was small and total, and somehow audible over the low hum of 250 people, because the people nearest to them had already gone quiet, already turned, already understood that something was happening. The 2 halves fell. They did not float, they dropped clean and quick to the marble floor and landed there. Gold lettering facing up. The silence that followed was not long. Maybe 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, the circle had already begun to form, the nearest guests turning fully, the ones behind them rising on their toes to see, the phones going up one by one and then several at once, camera lights blinking on like small cold stars in the museum light. Naomi looked at the pieces on the floor. Then she looked at Diana. Then she bent down, slowly, without hesitation, without any visible emotion passing across her face. She bent at the knees and she picked up both halves of the torn invitation, and she stood back up. She held them in her palm. She looked at them for a moment. Then she closed her fingers around them lightly and kept them there. She did not speak. She did not need to, because the room was already watching. And what the room was watching was a woman who had just been publicly humiliated, choosing, with complete deliberateness, the specific response of doing nothing dramatic at all. Diana had expected something, fear or anger or tearful protestation, something that would confirm the story she was telling, something that would make the crowd feel like witnesses to a correction rather than participants in an injustice. She did not get it. What she got was stillness. And the stillness was, in the way that unexpected things sometimes are, far more destabilizing than any reaction would have been. Colton's TikTok had 4,000 views. The number was climbing every time he glanced at the screen. He adjusted his angle. He kept the camera on Naomi's face. He said, "She's still standing there." Like, genuinely, she's just standing there. His tone was the tone of someone narrating something they find baffling and entertaining in equal measure. His followers were responding. Comments moving fast. The word delusional appeared 14 times in the first 2 minutes. Gerald Hargrove had not moved. He was standing 12 feet away and he was watching this happen. He had watched his wife cross the room. He had watched the conversation begin. He had watched the invitation get torn. He had watched Naomi bend down and pick up the pieces with the composure of someone who had access to reserves of dignity that most people in this room had never needed to develop. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He reached in. He looked at the screen. 2 words and a name, E. Carter. He stared at it. The phone stopped buzzing, missed call. He looked at the name on the screen for 2 full seconds after the call ended. He put the phone back in his pocket. He did not move from his spot. He did not cross the 12 feet of marble between himself and the situation his wife had created. He did not say his wife's name in a tone that meant stop. He did not walk over to Naomi and say, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let me sort this out." He did not do any of the things that were available to him in that moment. He stood where he was standing, and he was quiet, and the phone in his pocket was quiet. And the quiet had a weight to it that Gerald Hargrove was not examining directly, because examining it directly would require him to look at something he had been successfully not looking at for a very long time. 31 years of marriage. 31 years of choosing the path that avoided the confrontation. Not because he did not know better. He knew better. He was a man who had built a company from nothing, who had made hard calls in boardrooms, who had fired people he liked and kept people he did not when the numbers required it. He was not a weak man in the ways that were visible, but there was this other thing, this specific failure that wore the costume of discretion and called itself keeping the peace. And he had been doing it for so long that the muscle that should have been there had simply stopped being there. Or maybe it was there. Maybe it had always been there. Maybe the question was just whether he could find it before the evening ended. He did not move. Dr. Adrian Foss was standing at the edge of the room, near the corridor that led to the museum's permanent collection, when the crowd around Naomi began to form. She had arrived 40 minutes ago. She was a cardiothoracic surgeon, 51 years old, 2 decades at New York Presbyterian, head of her department for the last 4 years. She was here because she had been nominated for the Caldwell Medical Excellence Award, and the museum had requested her presence at the gala as part of the recognition. She had been at these events before. The charity circuit, the networking circuit, the specific terrain of Manhattan evenings where the ostensible purpose was philanthropy, and the actual purpose was something more complex and less easily named. She knew how to move through these rooms. She knew what they were. She also knew Naomi Carter. Not closely. They had been at 2 previous events together and had a mutual contact at New York Presbyterian who had introduced them briefly 6 months ago. She knew who Naomi was. She knew who Naomi's father was. She watched the circle form around Naomi. She watched Colton filming. She watched Diana performing for the crowd with the ease of someone who had been performing in public for 30 years and had never once been seriously held accountable for it. And she felt something move through her that was specific and recognizable and not unfamiliar. The particular cold clarity that arrives when you watch something happen in public that has been happening in private for a very long time, and you understand that the only thing separating this moment from every other similar moment is that this one has cameras. She did not move toward the circle immediately. She was watching and waiting and making a decision about when the right moment was to walk into the center of this, because she had been in enough rooms to know that timing mattered. That walking in too early could inadvertently make it easier for Diana to reframe the situation as a dispute between equals rather than what it actually was. She waited. Officer Dwight Keene came from the East Corridor at a pace that was professional and controlled and communicated nothing about what he was actually feeling, which was a particular species of dread. He was 43 years old. He had been in building security for 19 years. He had worked at the Caldwell for 9 of them. He was good at his job. He was good at reading situations and calibrating his responses to them, and moving through difficult moments in a way that resolved rather than escalated. He took in the scene in the time it takes to take a breath. Diana Hargrove. The phones, the circle. Naomi standing at the center of it with something in her closed fist that he could not quite see. The torn paper on the floor, no. She had picked it up, it was in her hand. The event coordinator hovering at the edge of the situation, looking like someone who needed a decision made for her. He approached Naomi. Not Diana. Not the coordinator. Naomi. He knew, as he walked toward her, that this was the right approach, and also that approaching her rather than Diana was going to be interpreted by certain people in this crowd as confirmation of Diana's version of events. He knew that, and he was approaching her anyway, because she was the one standing in the center, and she was the one who needed to be addressed directly and professionally, and with the basic courtesy that every person in this building deserved regardless of what the woman in the burgundy gown was saying about her. "Ma'am," he said. "Low, even professional. I've been asked to verify your invitation status for tonight's event." Naomi looked at him. "I understand, Officer Keene." She said his name, his actual name. Not his title, not his badge number, not sir or officer or hey you, his name. He paused. Just briefly. 1 beat. She said it the way you say a name when you already know it and you are using it because you believe in the small but significant act of acknowledging that a person you are speaking to is a person with a name. Not to impress anyone, not to make a point, because that was how she moved through the world. She paid attention to the people that most people looked straight through. She always had. Keane recovered. "Ma'am, if you have any additional identification or documentation." "She doesn't," Diana said from behind him. She had come closer while he was approaching Naomi. She was now standing just behind his left shoulder. "She came in with an invitation that has been confirmed as irregular, and she's been disrupting this event since she arrived. I'm asking you to remove her." A voice from the crowd, 3 feet to Keane's right. "She hasn't disrupted anything, Dr. Adrian Foss." She had stepped forward at the exact right moment. "Not too early now." "She's been standing in one spot," Dr. Fossey said, "while your family organized a recording session around her." Diana turned to look at her. It was the kind of look that was designed to communicate, without any words, that Dr. Foss had just made a social miscalculation and would be aware of the consequences shortly. Dr. Foss did not appear to receive the communication. "I'm not sure I know you," Diana said. Her voice was very controlled. "Adrian Foss," she said. "Cardiothoracic surgery, New York Presbyterian. And I've been watching what's happening in this room for the last 6 minutes, so I have a reasonably clear picture of who's disrupting what." Colton's phone swung toward Dr. Foss for a moment. The comment section responded, "Who is she?" And "Oh, this just got interesting," and "Wait," and approximately 400 variations of the same reaction delivered at the speed of people who could type faster than they could think. Diana smiled. The specific smile of a woman who has been challenged before and has a toolkit for it. "I appreciate your concern, Dr. Foss, but this is a private matter involving event security, and I think—" "It's on TikTok," Dr. Foss said. "So it's not especially private." Someone in the crowd laughed, short, quickly covered. "But there." Diana's smile tightened by a fraction. The crowd had grown. 50 people now, maybe 60, in a loose ring. Not all of them filming. Some of them watching with the specific expression of people who were trying to determine which side of this situation they were on. Some of them had already determined it and were staying anyway. The way people stay when something true is being uncovered in public, and the uncovering is both uncomfortable and impossible to look away from. Judge Loretta Whitfield was standing near the back of the crowd with her husband. She was 64 years old. She had spent 30 years on the federal bench. She had presided over civil rights cases, discrimination suits, housing cases, employment cases. She had heard thousands of hours of testimony about moments that looked, from the outside, like social friction and were actually something else entirely. She recognized what she was watching. She took out her phone. She was not filming in the way Colton was filming, for an audience with commentary. She was recording quietly, phone angled down, because she was a person who understood that documentation was not the same as performance, and that the difference mattered enormously when you were standing in front of a situation that was going to require accountability later. She pressed record. The recording began at 8:07 p.m. At 8:11 p.m., Dr. Margaret Voss arrived from the administrative corridor. She was the museum director, 62 years old, with the energy of someone who had been managing this institution for 18 years and had seen enough situations to know, within approximately 4 seconds of entering a room, exactly how serious a situation was. She entered at 4 seconds and immediately calibrated to serious. She had her tablet. She was scrolling through the donor records before she reached the edge of the crowd. She found the entry. She read it. She read it again to make sure she had read it correctly the first time. Carter Foundation. Platinum sponsor, 3 consecutive years. Annual contribution, $100,000. Total to date, $300,000. She looked at the table listing for tonight's event. Table 7, East Window. Carter Foundation. Contact Naomi Carter, Deputy Director. She looked up from the tablet. She looked at Naomi, standing in the center of the circle. She looked at Diana, and her face did something that a face does when 2 pieces of information collide with each other, and the collision produces something that has to be absorbed before it can be addressed. She moved toward the situation. "Mrs. Hargrove," she said, reaching the inner ring of the crowd. "I think I should—" "Margaret, I've handled it," Diana said, without turning. "Security is addressing the situation." "The situation," Voss said carefully, "is that I have Carter Foundation listed as a platinum sponsor with a confirmed reservation and a documented 3-year giving history." She held up the tablet. "The contact name for their table is Naomi Carter." The crowd processed this information. Not all at once. In the particular ripple of a crowd processing something that changes the frame of everything that has already happened. Diana's expression did not break. She was too practiced for that. But something behind it moved. Foundation names can be misappropriated, she said. Not loudly. Almost to herself, like she was working through a problem rather than making a public declaration. It happens more than people realize. Corporate identity. I'm her, Naomi said. Quiet, factual. The two words landed in the room with the weight of something that had been obvious for a while, and was only now being stated. I'm Naomi Carter. My father is Elliot Carter. Carter Foundation is his foundation, and I am the deputy director, and I have been representing us at events like this one for 2 years. She looked at Dr. Voss. The table near the east window has our name on it. You can also call my father directly if you need further confirmation, although I should tell you he's been trying to reach Gerald Hargrove for the past 40 minutes, so he may already be aware that something has gone wrong tonight. The mention of Gerald's name changed the air in the room. Gerald, who had been standing at the edge of his original spot for the past 13 minutes, felt the change even from where he was standing. He felt the room's attention recalibrate slightly, the way it does when a name is mentioned and the person attached to that name suddenly becomes visible in a new way. He looked at his phone. 4 missed calls, all from E. Carter. He put the phone back in his pocket. At 8:19 p.m., Naomi's phone buzzed for the 9th time. Dad, the screen said. She looked at it. She pressed decline. Diana saw the decline. Even her personal calls are a disruption, she said to the nearest guests, in the tone of someone making an observation rather than an accusation. This is precisely why these events require careful curation. When you don't control the guest list, you end up with situations like this. What situation? Dr. Voss said. She had not moved from her spot. A woman standing quietly while your son films her? A situation that has required security intervention, Diana said. Security hasn't intervened, Dr. Voss said. Security has stood there looking extremely uncomfortable, which is the appropriate response to being put in an impossible position. Officer Keene, who was indeed standing there looking extremely uncomfortable, said nothing. He was thinking about a thing he did not want to think about, which was the moment he had heard Naomi say his name. His actual name, not his title. The moment he had recognized, in the specific way that recognition arrives when it is inconvenient, that the person at the center of this circle had more dignity in the way she said one word than most of the people currently filming her had demonstrated in the entire evening. He was thinking about the fact that his job, the specific function of his employment, was to maintain order and address security concerns. And he was standing in a room where the only person who was not creating disorder was the person he had been asked to remove. He had not removed her. He was not going to remove her. He had not yet examined what that decision was going to cost him. He was just holding it, standing in the space of it, doing the thing that turned out to be much harder than it looked, which was staying still when everything around you was moving. And the movement was in the wrong direction. The crowd had grown to somewhere between 80 and 100 people. The servers had clustered near the kitchen doors. The string quartet had stopped playing. Brielle's live stream had 900 viewers. Colton's and TikTok had crossed 28,000 views. In the comments on Colton's video, the word wait had started appearing with increasing frequency, not in reaction to what was being filmed, in response to other comments. People telling each other to wait, to pay attention. That something about this was not what it looked like. The crowd did not know yet what it looked like, but it was beginning to feel it. At 8:23 p.m., Naomi's phone buzzed for the 12th time. She looked at it. She did not decline immediately. She held the phone in her hand for a moment longer than she had held it any of the previous 11 times. She looked at her father's name on the screen. She was thinking about something that had nothing to do with the Hargroves, or the crowd, or the cameras, or the torn invitation, still folded in her other hand. She was thinking about a conversation she had with her father 6 weeks ago, when they had first begun reviewing the Hargrove Capital Partnership proposal. She had told him then that the numbers looked right, but that she wanted to see the family in person before she gave her final recommendation. He had asked her why. She had said because numbers can be made to look like anything. People are harder to fake. He had nodded. He trusted her judgment that way. He always had. She declined the call. 30 seconds passed. A minute. At 8:26 p.m. it buzzed again. 17th call. She looked at the screen, and this time she answered. The room did not go quiet because anyone asked it to. It went quiet because something in the quality of Naomi's movement, the slow, deliberate way she raised the phone to her ear, communicated to every person within 20 feet that whatever was about to happen was going to matter. "Hi, Dad," she said. Her voice was warm, steady, the voice of a woman calling from a quiet room on an ordinary evening, not from the center of a circle of people holding lit phones. Elliot Carter's voice came through the speaker. She had not put it on speakerphone. But the room was quiet enough that his words reached the nearest guests. "Naomi." "Are you all right?" "I'm all right," she said. "I'm still at the Caldwell." A pause on the line. "Tell me what's happening." She took a breath, slow and even, and then she looked up. Not at the crowd, not at the phones. She looked directly at Diana Hargrove, and she started talking. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform. She spoke at the same volume and pace she had been using all evening. And she described in order, with precision, exactly what had happened since she had arrived at the Caldwell Museum of Art at 7:42 p.m. The approach, what Diana said, what the coordinator did, what Diana did with the invitation, what Colton filmed, what Brielle broadcast, what Officer Keene was asked to do, the name Diana used, all of it, in sequence, with the specificity of a person who had been paying careful attention to every detail from the moment it started, because she had understood from very early in the evening that the details were going to matter. 250 guests stood in the grand hall of the Caldwell Museum and listened to a 27-year-old woman describe their evening back to them from the inside. Diana's face had stopped moving. Gerald Hargrove's hand had gone to his jacket pocket, not to take out the phone, just to touch it. The way people touch things when they need something solid, when the ground has shifted under them, and they need to confirm that at least one thing is still where they left it. Colton's phone was still recording. 41,000 views. The comments had fully shifted. The mockery was gone. In its place, questions. Who is her dad? Who is E. Carter? What does Carter Foundation do? Somebody in the comments had started a thread. The thread was growing. Brielle's live stream had crossed 1,400 viewers. She had stopped narrating 7 minutes ago. She was just filming now, holding the phone up, not knowing what to do with it or with herself, which was a feeling she was not accustomed to and had no practiced response for. On the other end of the phone, Elliot Carter was quiet for a moment after Naomi finished. Then he said 2 words. "Don't move." He said them with a quietness that was not soft, the particular quietness of a man who has already made every decision that needs to be made and is now simply communicating the outcome. Naomi lowered the phone. She looked at Officer Keene. "You were about to ask me to leave," she said. He said nothing. "I understand," she said. "You were doing your job." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not angry at you," which was, Keene thought later, the hardest thing anyone had said to him in 19 years of security work. Not because it was cruel, because it was true, and because the truth of it required him to think about something he had been successfully not thinking about for the past 28 minutes. She looked at Diana. Diana looked back. And the room, all of it, the chandeliers, and the white linen and the crystal, and the 250 guests, and the string quartet, and the servers and the cameras, and the 80,000 people watching on various screens across the city, held its breath. Naomi Carter opened her hand. The 2 halves of the torn invitation lay in her palm side by side. Gold lettering. The Caldwell crest split and reunited. She looked at them for a moment. Then she looked up. Not at Diana, not at the crowd, not at the cameras, at the east window, at the table with the small gold placard that read Carter Foundation. Third from the left, right where she had always been supposed to be. Elliot Carter did not sit down. He stood in the center of the room, and he looked at the Hargrove family the way you look at something you are trying to understand. Not with anger, not with performance, with the quiet, focused attention of a man who had built a billion-dollar company by seeing things clearly before other people saw them at all. Diana had not moved. Gerald had not moved. Neither had the 250 guests arranged in a loose, stunned semicircle around all of them. The servers had retreated to the kitchen doorway. The string quartet had packed their instruments. The event coordinator with the clipboard had disappeared entirely, which was probably the smartest decision anyone made all evening. Brielle's phone was still up. Live stream. 2,400 viewers. She was not narrating anymore. She did not know what to say. Colton's TikTok had crossed 70,000 views. The comments were moving so fast they were illegible. He kept the phone raised, but his arm had started to shake slightly. He was 26 years old and he was beginning to understand that something had gone wrong. He could not yet calculate how wrong, but he could feel it, the way you feel weather changing before the clouds arrive. Elliot looked at Gerald. "Gerald," he said. "First name. No title, no courtesy buffer." Gerald straightened. "I've been calling you for 2 hours," Elliot said. "I know," Gerald said. "Just that, I know." No explanation attached. Elliot let that sit for a moment. Let the room hear it. Let the room understand what it meant that a man had received 17 calls from his most important business partner, while his wife publicly humiliated that partner's daughter, and the man had simply watched. "I know," Gerald had said. 2 words that contained an entire confession. Naomi stood 3 feet to her father's left. She had not moved from her spot since Elliot walked in. She was watching Gerald. Not Diana, Gerald. Because she had understood something in the last 28 minutes that was more important than anything Diana had done. Diana was the fire. Gerald was the oxygen. Elliot turned slightly. His assistant, a woman named Patricia who had appeared quietly from somewhere near the entrance and now stood just behind his left shoulder, with a tablet, leaned forward. "Sir," Patricia said, low and clear. "Do you want me to read it now?" Elliot looked at Diana. "Actually," he said. "Yes." Patricia straightened the tablet and she began. "Hargrove Capital. Current debt position, $1.4 billion. Her voice was clinical. No drama in it at all, which somehow made it worse. Stock price down 71% year over year. Quarterly operating loss, $94 million. Cash runway at current burn rate." She paused. 1 beat. 71 days. The room was absolutely silent. Projected solvency without external partnership, Patricia continued. None. The Williams-Hargrove industrial acquisition was the last viable deal in the pipeline. All other potential investors have either declined or paused due diligence following Q3 disclosures. She set the tablet down. Gerald's face had gone the color of old paper. Diana had not moved. She was still standing in the same posture she had been holding for the last 10 minutes. Straight-backed, composed. But something behind her eyes was moving fast, recalculating. Like a computer running a program it had not been designed to run. Colton's phone dropped by 3 inches. He caught it. His TikTok was still live. 79,000 viewers watching his family's financial ruin get read aloud in a museum, which, he had not planned for that. He had planned for a viral video about a woman in a cheap dress who did not belong at the gala. He had not planned for this. The partnership agreement, Elliot said, still looking at Gerald. $800 million. Signing scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. He paused. Past tense, Gerald. Scheduled. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Rings expanding outward. Through the crowd, through the room. Through 79,000 people watching on a phone screen held by a 26-year-old who had started recording because he thought it would be funny. Diana found her voice first. "Elliot," she said. Different tone now. The theatrical warmth was gone. Something underneath it had surfaced. Something that was reaching, grasping, trying to locate solid ground. "There's been a misunderstanding. I had no idea who Naomi was. I had no idea she was your daughter." Elliot looked at her. "I know," he said. The same 2 words Gerald had used. But coming from Elliot they meant something completely different. "That," Elliot said, "is the problem." He said it quietly. No raised voice. No dramatics. Just the plain, direct statement of a man who was not interested in performing this moment for anyone in the room. "You didn't need to know who she was," he said. "She is a person. She had a valid invitation. She was standing in a room she was invited to stand in. Those 3 facts should have been enough. They should have been more than enough." Diana opened her mouth. "They were not enough," Elliot said. "So let's discuss what happened instead." He looked at Patricia. She turned the tablet and held it up so that the room could see the screen. It showed Colton's TikTok feed, his own video, playing back at him from 12 feet away. The crowd watched Colton watch himself. That was something. Watching a person watch themselves do a thing they cannot undo. The face he made, the slight flinch, the way his jaw tightened and then went slack. 4 videos, Patricia said. Posted tonight. Combined views as of 3 minutes ago, 112,000 and rising. Content includes calling Miss Carter delusional, suggesting she does not belong in civilized society, providing live commentary on her humiliation for entertainment purposes. She swiped. Brielle Hargrove Instagram live stream. 2 hours and 14 minutes of active broadcast. Current viewer count, 2,800. Content includes mockery of Miss Carter's attire, encouragement of crowd participation, and repeated suggestions that security physically remove her. Brielle's hand dropped. Her phone went to her side. The live stream was still running, but the camera was now pointing at the floor. Her viewer count hit 3,200. Elliot looked at Diana directly for the first time. "Diana Hargrove," he said. Naomi looked at her father when he said the name, just briefly. Something passed between them that was not quite a smile and not quite pride, and was something quieter than both. "Diana Hargrove," he said, "was documented making physical contact with my daughter, confiscating and destroying a valid event invitation, and calling for security to remove, quote, the trash." The word sat in the air. Trash. Diana's jaw moved. Nothing came out. Because the word was hers. She had said it. In front of 250 people and 79,000 strangers and a camera that had been running since 7:58 p.m. You cannot unsay a thing. That was the brutal math of this moment. You can apologize for it. You can explain it. You can spend years trying to account for it. But the word itself exists now. It is in the record. It is in the video. It is in the memory of every person standing in this room. Trash. Said about a woman whose family had donated $3.1 million to the institution they were standing in. Dr. Margaret Voss made a sound. Small. Involuntary. Like something inside her had finally processed the full magnitude of what had happened in her building tonight. She was scrolling through the donor records on her tablet, with the focused desperation of someone looking for a door in a burning room. Carter Foundation. Platinum sponsor. 3 consecutive years. Total contributions to Caldwell Museum of Art, $3,100,000. The largest single foundation donor in the museum's modern history. She looked up. She looked at Diana. She looked at Naomi. "Miss Carter," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the second word. "I owe you?" "You don't need to apologize right now, Dr. Voss," Naomi said. Gently. "This isn't your fault." Voss looked like that gentleness was harder to receive than criticism would have been. Dr. Adrienne Foss, who had been standing at the edge of the crowd this entire time, stepped forward. She walked through the ring of guests with the purposeful ease of a surgeon moving through a hospital corridor. She stopped beside Naomi and turned to face the room. "I want to say something," she said. The room looked at her. "I am a physician. I have spent 23 years at New York Presbyterian. I have sat on the boards of 3 medical institutions in this city. I have attended this gala 4 times." She paused. "What I witnessed here tonight was not a misunderstanding. It was not a mistake. It was a pattern of behavior that I have seen replicated in boardrooms, in hospital wards, in academic committees, and on the street." Her voice was even, controlled, like a scalpel. "It is the assumption that certain people do not belong in certain spaces. It is the decision, made in seconds, based on nothing but what a person looks like, that they must be wrong, that their presence is an error, that they should be corrected." The room was very still. "Naomi Carter did nothing wrong tonight," Dr. Foss said. "And the fact that she had to stand in this spot for 28 minutes, while this family filmed her and called her names in front of half of Manhattan." She stopped, took a breath. "That is not something an apology fixes. An apology is the beginning, not the end." Silence. Then, from the left, Judge Loretta Whitfield stepped forward. She was 64. Gray hair, natural, cut short. She wore a deep green dress and no jewelry except a simple watch. She had the posture of someone who had spent 30 years telling rooms full of people to be quiet and having them obey. "I've been recording," she said. Not an announcement. A statement. "I have 44 minutes of video. Time-stamped. Complete. From the moment Mrs. Hargrove first approached Miss Carter to this conversation, including the destruction of the invitation, including the names used, she looked at Gerald. The moments in between. Gerald looked at her. She looked back. She did not look away first. As someone who has presided over civil rights cases in New York courts for 15 years, Judge Whitfield said, "I want to be precise about what I observed tonight. I observed targeted harassment. I observed the deliberate destruction of private property. I observed coordinated recording intended to humiliate, and I observed..." She paused on this. a bystander who was in a position to intervene and chose not to. She was still looking at Gerald when she said the last part. Gerald knew it. The entire room knew it. He stood there with his phone in his jacket pocket, and the weight of 17 declined calls on his conscience, and he did not look away from Judge Whitfield because he had enough integrity left to understand that he had earned this moment, every second of it. Diana turned to him. Her voice had dropped to something that the nearest people could barely hear. Gerald, say something. He looked at his wife. And for the first time in the evening, for possibly the first time in years, Gerald Hargrove did not do what Diana told him to do. He looked at Naomi instead. I knew your father was calling, he said. Flat, direct. Like a man who had decided that if he was going to say this, he was going to say it without dressing it up. I saw his name on my phone. I knew who you might be. And I didn't. He stopped. I didn't do anything. Diana went rigid. Colton lowered his phone for the first time all night. Brielle's live stream was still running at her side, still pointing at the floor, but the microphone was catching everything. I don't know if that matters now, Gerald said, but I want you to know I'm aware of it. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. She said nothing, which was, somehow, the only response that made sense. Elliot had been watching his daughter during Gerald's admission. He watched her receive it, watched her process it, watched her make a decision, in the span of about 4 seconds, about what she was going to do with it. He had raised her. He knew her. He knew what was coming next. And he stepped back slightly, just enough to give her the floor, because this was hers to say. Naomi looked at the room. 250 guests. Dozens of phones. 79,000 people watching on Colton's TikTok alone. Brielle's stream. The judge's recording. Dr. Voss with her tablet pressed to her chest. Dr. Foss with her arms crossed and her eyes steady. Officer Dwight Keene standing near the east corridor, looking at his own shoes. She looked at all of it, and then she looked at Gerald. You have 3,200 employees, she said. Gerald blinked. I looked it up, she said. Before I came tonight, I look up every organization that my father's company does business with. It's part of my job. She paused. 3,200 people. Most of them have nothing to do with what happened here tonight. They didn't choose your wife. They didn't make these decisions. They just work for your company because they need to. The room was so quiet that the sound of the air conditioning was audible. So I'm not going to ask my father to walk away, Naomi said. Diana's head came up. Gerald went very still. But I am going to ask for something, Naomi said. Not compensation. Not a settlement. Not a press release drafted by a PR firm at 9 tomorrow morning. She held up the torn invitation pieces, still in her hand, still closed in her fist. I'm going to ask for something that actually costs you something. Elliot watched his daughter. The room watched Naomi. And Naomi looked at Gerald Hargrove and said exactly what she wanted. Clear, direct. No theater, public apologies. From each member of the family. Not statements, apologies. In person. On naming what they did. Not what happened. What they did. A mandatory audit of Hargrove Capital's hiring and promotion practices for the past 5 years. Independent firm. Full access. Results made public. A $12 million fund, administered by Carter Foundation, directed at education and workforce development in underserved communities across New York. And Gerald would personally read the name of every employee of color who had been passed over for promotion at Hargrove Capital in the past 5 years, in front of the full board. On record. That last condition made Gerald close his eyes for a moment. Not because it was the most expensive, because it was the most true. The promotion data existed. He knew it existed. He had received the internal report 14 months ago. He had approved a memo acknowledging the disparity. And then he had let the memo sit in a folder, while other things demanded his attention. Other things. 71 days of other things. And the partnership, Naomi said, becomes a probationary agreement. Quarterly review. Specific benchmarks. One violation, it ends. She lowered the torn invitation to her side. That's what I'm asking for, she said. That's everything. Elliot was looking at her with something that had no simple name. It lived somewhere between pride and grief and the particular awe a parent feels when they watch their child become, in a single moment, more than you thought they were, even though you always knew they were capable. Diana spoke. You're giving us conditions, she said, like she had not quite believed it until she heard herself say it. After everything, Naomi said, I'm giving your employees a chance to keep their jobs. That's what I'm doing." Diana looked at her husband. Gerald was looking at the floor. Then he looked up. He looked at Naomi. And he said, "We accept." Diana made a sound. "Gerald, we accept," he said again. Diana stared at him. This man she had been married to for 31 years. This man who had chosen silence 17 times tonight. Who had stood 12 feet away while she tore an invitation and called a woman trash and made it entertainment. This man was looking at her now with something she had not seen from him in a very long time. A line. "The board will want I'm the CEO," Gerald said. "The board will be informed." Patricia had already opened a new document on her tablet. She looked at Elliot. He nodded once. She began typing. Dr. Foss uncrossed her arms. Judge Whitfield pressed stop on her recording. Officer Dwight Keene looked up from the floor, finally, and looked at Naomi. She did not look back at him right away. But when she did, she gave him a small nod. Not forgiveness, not dismissal, just acknowledgement. "You were here, I saw you. We'll deal with that separately." Colton's phone was in his pocket. His TikTok had stopped. He had ended the stream somewhere around the part where his father read out the quarterly losses, and his face went the color of wet cement. He did not know the views were still climbing. Still climbing without him. Screenshots and screen recordings spreading across 3 platforms at a speed that bore no relationship to anything he could control. 89,000 views. And rising. Brielle's stream had also gone dark, but it had run long enough. Long enough for 3,000 people to watch Gerald Hargrove admit that he knew, that he saw the name on the phone, that he chose nothing. 3,000 people. Watching a man confess to the specific and ordinary cowardice of doing nothing when doing something was exactly what was required. Dr. Voss had moved to stand near the auction tables. She was on her phone calling someone. Her voice was low, and her expression was the expression of a person who knows they are going to be having a very difficult series of conversations for the foreseeable future, and is trying to start with the least difficult one first. The guests had not dispersed. That was the thing. 250 people who had come tonight for champagne and silent auction items, and the social currency of being seen at the right event. They were still here, standing in a museum at 9:47 on a Friday night, not moving, because none of them wanted to be the first person to leave, because something had happened here tonight that did not have a clean name yet. It was not a scandal. It was not a confrontation. It was not a lesson, exactly, though it had that shape. It was something that had been true for a long time, and for the past 49 minutes it had been made visible, made audible, made real in a way that the people in this room were going to have a very difficult time putting back into the place where they had been keeping it before. That was the other thing Naomi Carter had done tonight, without trying, without planning, just by standing still and keeping her name, and not explaining herself to people who had no right to demand explanations. She had made the invisible visible. And now 250 people were standing in a museum holding their phones and looking at each other and thinking about the last time they had stood in a room while something like this happened, and what they had done, or not done, and whether the difference between them and Gerald Hargrove was as large as they had assumed 10 minutes ago. Elliot put his hand on Naomi's shoulder. "Brief. Warm. You want to get out of here," he said quietly. She looked at the room. All of it. The guests, the servers, the quiet quartet, Dr. Foss, Judge Whitfield, Officer Keene, the auction tables with their silent items and their little bid sheets that no one had touched in an hour. "Not yet," she said. He nodded. He knew better than to ask why. Because Naomi Carter was not done. She was not done because the conditions had been stated but not signed. She was not done because Patricia was still typing. She was not done because Gerald had said yes and Diana had gone silent, and those were both necessary things, but they were not the same as the thing she was actually waiting for. She was waiting to see if Gerald Hargrove would say the true thing. Not the strategic thing. Not the damage control thing. Not the thing that kept the deal alive and the board calm and the narrative manageable. The true thing. She had heard it start when he said, "I know about the phone calls." She had seen it in the way he closed his eyes when she named the condition about reading the promotion records. There was something in Gerald Hargrove that was not entirely made of the same material as the rest of this evening. She had spotted it early. That flinch when he stood 12 feet away and touched his phone and did not take it out. He was not a good man tonight. She was clear-eyed about that. He had failed tonight in a way that had a cost, and the cost was real and he knew it. But she thought, and this was the thing she had not said out loud yet, not even to her father, she thought there might be something in Gerald Hargrove worth the trouble of finding out, or not. She would know soon enough. She stood in the Caldwell Museum of Art with her father beside her, and a torn invitation in her fist, and the eyes of 250 people on her face. She had not cried. She had not raised her voice. She had not moved from her spot for 51 minutes. And she was not moving now. The agreement was signed at 11:14 p.m. Not on paper. Patricia typed it into a formal document on her tablet and sent it simultaneously to 3 email addresses: Elliot's legal team, Gerald's corporate attorney, and Judge Loretta Whitfield, who had been asked to serve as an independent witness and had agreed without hesitation. The document was 7 pages. It contained 4 conditions. It contained specific timelines, specific benchmarks, specific consequences for non-compliance. It was not a handshake deal. It was not a gentleman's agreement. It was binding. And everyone in that room who understood what binding meant, understood that the Hargrove family had just signed something they could not quietly walk back in 6 months, when the news cycle moved on, and the memory faded. The memory was not going to fade. Colton's TikTok had crossed 104,000 views before midnight. He had not posted anything new. He did not need to. The original video was spreading on its own, shared and reshared, and screenshotted and stitched and duetted by people who had not been anywhere near the Caldwell Museum of Art that evening, but who were watching the footage with the focused attention of people who recognized something true when they saw it. Brielle's Instagram Live had been archived automatically. 3,400 people had watched some portion of it. The full recording was 41 minutes long. Pieces of it were already circulating. The Hargrove family left the museum at 11:28 p.m. They did not leave together. Gerald got into one car. Diana got into another. Colton and Brielle shared a third. No one spoke in any of the 3 cars for the duration of the ride home, which told its own story about the kind of family they were. The kind where silence was the default, where space was taken rather than given, where the problem was never addressed directly but circled endlessly like water around a drain until someone decided to act. That night, Gerald sat alone in his home office until 3 a.m. He did not call Diana. He did not call his attorney. He opened his laptop and pulled up an internal HR report from 14 months ago. The one he had approved and filed and not thought about since. The one that documented, in clean corporate language, that employees of color at Hargrove Capital were promoted at a rate 43% lower than their white counterparts at comparable performance levels. The one that had a memo attached to it, signed by Gerald, acknowledging the disparity and committing to a review that had not happened. He sat with that document open on his screen and he read every page of it, all 32 pages. He had read 12 of them the first time, 14 months ago, before something urgent pulled him away and he had never gone back. He read all 32 pages, and then he opened a new document and started writing names. Not because Naomi had asked him to yet. The formal audit was months away. The independent firm had not been appointed. The process had not begun. He started writing names because he needed to see them, because they had been in a file, abstract, statistical, a percentage point in a report. And sitting alone in his office at 3 a.m. with the weight of this evening still on his chest, Gerald Hargrove needed them to be something other than a percentage. He wrote 23 names. It took him 2 hours, because for each name he also looked up their file, their performance reviews, their tenure, their applications for promotion. And in case after case he found the same thing. Qualified, experienced, passed over, reason given, vague. Language like cultural fit and leadership presence and team alignment, language that sounded professional and meant nothing, and was used to justify decisions that had already been made for reasons that were never written down. He wrote all 23 names, and he left the document open on his screen when he finally went to bed at 5 a.m. 3 weeks passed. They were not quiet weeks. The TikTok footage had generated a news cycle, not front page, but persistent. The kind of story that appears in business sections and social media roundups and weekend magazine features. The kind of story that gets forwarded by people who know someone who works at Hargrove Capital, or who know someone who attended the Caldwell Gala, or who simply recognize in it something they have seen before and wanted someone to say something about. Diana Hargrove did not leave the house for 9 days. On the 10th day, she went to a meeting with her personal attorney. The meeting lasted 4 hours. She came home and sat in the living room and did not speak to Gerald for the remainder of the evening. On the 11th day, she called her attorney again. This call lasted 40 minutes. On the 12th day, she told Gerald she was considering challenging the agreement. Gerald looked at her. "On what grounds?" he said. "Coercion," she said. "We were under financial pressure. The agreement was signed under duress." Gerald sat back in his chair. "Diana," he said, "there are 112,000 people who watched our son film that woman being called trash in a museum we've donated to for 15 years. Diana said nothing. "Our signature is on a 7-page document witnessed by a federal judge," he said. "And you want to argue coercion? I want to protect our family." "Our family," Gerald said, "is the reason we need the agreement." He said it without cruelty, without satisfaction, like a man stating a fact that he had spent 12 days arriving at and was no longer willing to pretend was not true. Diana looked at him for a long moment. Then she left the room. She did not challenge the agreement, but she also did not attend the first bias training session. It was scheduled for 3 weeks after the gala, mandatory for all Hargrove Capital senior leadership, held in the company's main conference room on the 34th floor. 12 executives, 2 facilitators from an independent diversity consulting firm. 4 hours. Diana sent a note through her personal assistant saying she was unwell. Gerald went. He sat in the front row. He did not look at his phone once. The facilitators had designed the session around stories. Not statistics, not frameworks, not corporate policy language. Stories. Real accounts from real people about moments when they had been made to feel, in workplaces very similar to this one, that they did not belong, that their presence was conditional, that they had to perform a version of themselves that was smaller, quieter, less threatening in order to be tolerated. One of the facilitators asked the group, at the end of the first hour, to think of a time they had witnessed something unfair and said nothing. Silence. Long silence. Gerald raised his hand first. The room looked at him. "I received 17 phone calls on a Friday evening," he said, "from a man whose daughter was being publicly humiliated in a building I was standing in, and I declined everyone." The room was very still. "I knew," he said. "I had enough information to understand what was happening, and I made a calculation." He paused. "I decided that the cost of intervening was higher than the cost of staying quiet." One of the facilitators asked, "And now?" Gerald looked at the table in front of him. "Now I know what I paid," he said. "And I know who paid more." That was the session. That was where it started. Not with policy, not with a strategic plan, with a man in a conference room on a Tuesday morning saying a thing out loud that he had spent 3 weeks trying to find a less painful way to say. Colton did not say anything for 9 days. He went home the night of the gala and sat on the floor of his apartment and stared at his phone. Not at the TikTok. He had deleted the original from his account 2 hours after the event, which was 3 hours too late, and 400,000 impressions too late. But he had deleted it anyway, because it was the only thing he could think to do. He stared at his contacts. He had Naomi Carter's number. His father had given it to him the following morning, along with the instruction that what he did with it was his own decision. He stared at her name for 9 days. On the 10th day, he sent a text. It said, "I'd like to meet, no lawyers, no cameras. Just me. I understand if the answer is no." He put the phone face down on his kitchen counter and went to make coffee. The response came in 4 minutes. It said, "Tuesday noon. Carter Foundation offices, come alone." He stood in the kitchen holding his coffee cup and read the message 3 times. He had expected to wait longer. He had expected more conditions. He had expected, honestly, that the answer would be no. And some part of him, the part that had spent 9 days replaying the footage and looking at his own face on the screen and trying to find the moment where he could have made a different decision, that part of him had almost hoped for no. Because yes required him to actually show up, which was different from filming someone else's humiliation from a distance, which was the entire point. He showed up. The Carter Foundation offices occupied 3 floors of a building on Lexington Avenue. Clean lines, natural light. The walls displayed photographs from their grant programs, community centers, after-school initiatives, small business development programs, scholarship recipients. Faces, real ones. Not stock photography. Real people who had received real support and whose lives had changed in ways that were documented not with statistics but with images. Colton stood in the lobby and looked at the photographs for 4 minutes before the receptionist came to get him. Naomi was in a conference room on the 22nd floor. She was sitting at a round table with a glass of water and a legal pad and a pen. No phone in sight, no assistant, no one else. Colton sat down across from her. He had prepared something to say. He had written it out, revised it, read it back to himself. He had it in his pocket. He did not take it out, because he looked at her and understood immediately that a prepared speech was exactly the wrong thing, that she had not asked him here to receive a speech, that she had agreed to this meeting because she wanted to see what he would do when there was no script and no camera and no crowd to perform for. So he did not perform. He said, "I watched the footage back." She waited. "Not just mine," he said. Judge Whitfield released her recording. "I watched all 44 minutes of it." He stopped. "I watched my own face, the whole time. My expression. What another stop. Longer this time. I looked like I was having fun." Naomi said nothing. "I was having fun," he said. "That's what I've been sitting with. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was entertained. And those are not as different as I wanted them to be." Naomi picked up her pen. Not to write anything. Just to hold it. "What do you want from this meeting?" she asked. Colton looked at the table, then at her. "I don't know," he said. "I think I wanted to see if I could be in this room with you and not make it about me a beat." "Is that something?" he asked. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. "It's a start," she said. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Naomi did not offer forgiveness. She was clear about that, not unkindly but directly. About 15 minutes in, when Colton began moving toward language that was angling in that direction, she stopped him. "I'm not here to absolve you," she said. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" "It's a conversation," she said, "between two people, one of whom had a very specific experience and one of whom contributed to it. And I think there are things you could learn from that experience, if you're willing to actually learn them and not just perform learning them." He nodded. "How do I know which one I'm doing?" he asked. "You probably won't," she said. "Not at first. That's the honest answer. You do the work and you watch yourself, and eventually the distance between the performance and the real thing gets smaller. Or it doesn't. And then you know." He left the meeting with no promises made and no resolution achieved. He left with a list of 3 organizations Naomi had recommended he research, and the instruction to come back when he had spent actual time with at least one of them. Not donated money. Spent time. He came back 6 weeks later. He had spent time with a workforce development program in the Bronx that Carter Foundation partially funded. He had shown up on a Saturday morning with no phone, no crew, no plan to post about it. He had spent 4 hours helping with a mock interview workshop for adults re-entering the job market after periods of incarceration. He came back and sat across from Naomi again and told her about one man in particular. 47 years old, former delivery driver, had been out of work for 2 years, kept apologizing for things that did not require apology, apologized for taking up space at the table, apologized for asking a question, apologized for existing in the room. Colton told Naomi that sitting across from that man and watching him apologize for breathing had been one of the most uncomfortable 2 hours of his life. "Because?" Naomi asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I have never apologized for taking up space in my life," he said. "Not once." And that man couldn't stop. "And I kept thinking about who taught him to do that." He stopped. "And then I kept thinking about who taught me not to." Naomi wrote something on her legal pad. "Come back in 4 weeks," she said. He did. Officer Dwight Keene submitted his resignation 11 days after the gala. He did not make a statement. He did not contact the press. He filled out the paperwork, handed in his badge and his access card, and walked out of the Caldwell Museum of Art for the last time on a Tuesday afternoon, without speaking to anyone. He had worked there for 9 years. Naomi heard about it from Dr. Voss, who called her 3 days later to discuss the museum's internal review process. Voss mentioned Keene almost in passing. "The way you mention something you expect the other person already knows." Naomi did not already know. She called Keene's number the same evening. She had gotten it from the museum's staff directory, which was semi-public, which she was aware was slightly unorthodox, but she also knew that waiting for the appropriate official channel was not the right choice here. She knew that because Keene was a man who had done something difficult and was not receiving any acknowledgement of it from the people who should have acknowledged it. He answered on the 4th ring. "Mr. Keene," she said. A pause. Miss Carter, he said. I heard you resigned, she said. Yes, can I ask why? Another pause. Longer, because I knew it was wrong, he said. What they were asking me to do, I knew before I walked across that floor. I knew when I said your name back to you after you said mine. I knew. He stopped. And I still started walking. Naomi was quiet. I didn't remove you, he said. I want you to know that. I was going to ask you to come with me to a private space to discuss it. I wasn't going to physically. I know, she said. I could tell that might not mean much. It means something, she said. He was quiet. I've been thinking about something, she said. I work with an initiative that trains professionals from security, from social services, from corporate settings on what we call pressure compliance. The psychology of doing what you're told in a moment when what you're being told is wrong. What it costs to resist. What it costs not to. He said nothing. I think you have a story that people in that space need to hear, she said. Not as an example of failure, as an example of what recognition looks like. You knew in the moment. Most people don't let themselves know. They wait until it's over and then they reconstruct their certainty. Another long pause. I don't know if I want to talk about it, he said. That's okay, she said. Think about it. I'll leave it there. He called back 2 weeks later. He said yes. The audit began 44 days after the gala. An independent firm, Meridian Consulting Group, based in Washington and operating nationally, was appointed by mutual agreement of Carter Foundation and Hargrove Capital's board. 3 senior auditors, full access to 5 years of personnel records, hiring data, promotion data, compensation data, performance review language, termination records. It was not a comfortable process. The auditors requested files. The files were produced. The auditors asked questions. The questions required answers that many of Hargrove Capital's mid-level HR managers had never been asked before and did not have clean answers to. Not because the answers were being hidden. Because the answers had never been considered necessary. Because the system had operated without interrogating itself for long enough that it had forgotten to notice certain things. Things like the fact that in the senior leadership tier, the top 42 positions at Hargrove Capital, 38 of the holders were white. The 4 who were not had all been hired in the last 3 years. After a particular diversity initiative that had been announced with a press release and implemented with a hiring policy and followed up with nothing. Things like the fact that in the same 5-year period, the average tenure before promotion for white employees was 2.4 years. For employees of color, it was 4.1 years. Things like the language in the performance reviews. The auditors flagged 63 performance reviews across the 5-year period that contained language they categorized as coded. Aggressive applied to people of color at a rate 7 times higher than to white employees at the same performance level. Quiet leadership and measured approach appeared almost exclusively in reviews of white employees. Cultural fit appeared 41 times as a reason for a promotion decision. Not once was it defined. Gerald received the preliminary findings on a Thursday afternoon. He read them at his desk. All of them. He did not ask Patricia to summarize. He did not schedule a meeting to have them explained. He sat with the documents for 3 hours, and he read every flagged review and every data table and every chart. When Patricia knocked at 6 o'clock to ask if he needed anything, she found him still at his desk, with the documents spread in front of him, and his jacket off, and his reading glasses on, and the particular stillness of a man who has been sitting with something difficult for long enough that he has moved past the first layer of reaction into something quieter and more permanent. Cancel tomorrow morning, he said. The board prep? Reschedule it. I need the morning. She nodded and left. Gerald sat there for another hour, and then he pulled out the document he had started 3 weeks after the gala, the one with the 23 names. The employees of color who had been passed over for promotion with documentation that the audit had now confirmed was insufficient or coded or both. He had been adding to it. It had 31 names now. He looked at the list for a long time, and then he did something he had not done in the 9 weeks since the gala. He picked up his phone and called Diana. She answered on the second ring. The preliminary audit results came in, he said. Silence. It's bad, he said. Not illegal, but bad. The kind of bad that doesn't have a clean explanation. Gerald, I need you to understand something, he said. I'm going to read these names to the board. All 31 of them, with their files, with the documented reasons they were passed over. And I'm going to do it in person, not through a report. More silence. And then, he said, I'm going to recommend to the board that we establish a formal remediation process for each of them. Compensation review, promotion consideration, formal acknowledgement from the company. Diana said the board will push back. I know. Some of them will want to minimize it. Put it in legal terms. Make it about liability. I know, Gerald, what are you doing? He looked at the list on his desk. I'm doing what I should have done 14 months ago, he said. When I got the first report and I signed a memo and I went back to the other things. He did not wait for her to respond. I'll be home late, he said. And he hung up. Brielle Hargrove lost 4 brand partnerships in the 11 days following the gala. 3 of them notified her by email. 1 sent a representative to a scheduled meeting and delivered the news in person, which she later said was worse. Not because it was crueler, because it was more real. The total value of the contracts she lost was just under $700,000. She sat in her apartment and looked at the contracts on her screen and did the math, which took about 45 seconds and resulted in a number that made her feel briefly outside her own body. Then she took a shower, and then she sat on her bathroom floor and thought about a woman in a black dress holding 2 pieces of a torn invitation and not moving for 28 minutes, not crying, not explaining, just standing there. Brielle had spent 5 years building a following, 412,000 Instagram followers, a curated life, a specific aesthetic, a brand that was about aspirational living and luxury access and the art of looking like everything was beautiful all the time. She had built it carefully. She had worked at it genuinely. She was not, despite what the last 3 weeks might suggest, a person who had no skills or no values or no understanding of what she was doing. She was a person who had, for a significant portion of her adult life, operated in a world where certain questions were never asked, where certain things were never examined, where the frame was always the beautiful surface, and what was underneath the surface was not her department. That was the thing she kept coming back to, not her department. She had watched her mother tear an invitation in 2, and she had opened Instagram Live because that was what she did. That was her reflex. Something dramatic happens. You document it. You share it. Your numbers go up. She had not asked herself whether she should, because it had never been her department to ask. She went to Detroit 3 weeks after the gala. Not because Naomi told her to. Naomi had not given her any instructions. The conditions of the agreement applied to the company and to her parents, not to Brielle specifically. She was 24 years old, and she had no formal obligation to go anywhere. She went because she had been staring at her apartment ceiling for 3 weeks, and she needed to be somewhere that was not her apartment. And because she had looked up the Carter Foundation's grant recipients, and one of them was a literacy and job readiness program in Detroit that had been operating for 11 years, and was, according to every source she could find, genuinely effective and genuinely underfunded. She emailed the program director, not as Brielle Hargrove, influencer, daughter of Gerald Hargrove of Hargrove Capital. Just as Brielle. She said she had some free time and she was willing to help with whatever needed doing, and she did not expect recognition for it. The director wrote back in 2 hours, "Can you come next weekend? We need help with intake sessions on Saturday morning." She went, she came back, she went again. She did not post about it. Not the first time. Not the second time. She sat with the not posting for 3 weeks. Feeling, in a way she had no previous language for, the difference between doing a thing and performing a thing. The difference between the action and the documentation of the action. The strange privacy of doing something that no one could see. She went a 3rd time. And a 4th. On the 5th visit, she asked the director if she could bring a small camera. Just to document what the program was doing. Not herself, the program, the people in it, the work. The director said, "Let me ask the participants." The participants said yes. So she filmed it, carefully, with permission, with the participants telling their own stories in their own words. She edited it herself over 4 evenings, and then she sat with it for another week before she posted it. It was 14 minutes long. It had no music underneath it, no filters, no glamour, just people, talking about what they needed, what they had found, what they were building. She posted it on a Thursday evening. By Friday morning it had been viewed 62,000 times. By Saturday evening, 340,000 times. The comments were nothing like her previous comments. There was no catalog of compliments about her appearance, or her aesthetic, or the quality of her lighting. There were people talking about the program, asking how to support it, sharing their own stories about similar programs that had changed their lives, asking if Brielle was going back, asking if she was going to post more. She read every comment. All of them. It took 4 hours. And when she was done, she sat in her apartment and thought about the numbers. 340,000 views. On a 14-minute video about a literacy program in Detroit. No brand deal. No aesthetic. No performance. Just the truth of what was happening in a room where people were trying to make their lives better. She thought about her mother watching her. About her father reading names from a list. About Colton sitting across from Naomi in a conference room with a prepared speech he did not deliver. She thought about Naomi, standing in the Caldwell Museum, not moving for 28 minutes, holding a torn invitation, not crying, not explaining, not performing dignity, just having it, just being it. That was the thing Brielle kept returning to. Not the injustice of what had happened. She understood the injustice. She was trying to understand it more. She was working on that understanding every week in Detroit. But the composure that was not cold, that was not removed. That was fully present and fully human and somehow entirely unmoved by everything her family had thrown at it. Brielle had spent 5 years building an aesthetic, a surface, and she had watched a woman in a simple black dress be more real in 28 minutes than Brielle had been in 5 years. She opened her laptop. She started typing, not a caption, a letter, to Naomi Carter. She did not send it immediately. She held it for a week and revised it 4 times and then sent it on a Thursday morning without reading it back a 5th time, because if she read it back a 5th time she would not send it at all. Naomi replied 2 days later. The reply was 4 sentences long. The last sentence said, "I'm glad you went to Detroit." Brielle read it 3 times. Then she booked her next trip. The audit was completed 91 days after the gala. Gerald stood in front of the Hargrove Capital Board of Directors on a Wednesday morning in February. 12 people. The conference room on the 34th floor. The same room where the first bias training had been held 2 months before. He had a report in front of him. He did not open it. He had the list. 31 names. He read them out loud, one by one. For each name he said the year they had been passed over for promotion, the documented reason given, and what the audit had determined about the adequacy of that reason. It took 47 minutes. The board was silent for the duration. When he finished, he set the list down. "These are not statistics," he said. "These are people who worked for this company and did their jobs and were told, in language that we chose carefully enough to protect ourselves from accountability, that they were not ready, that they needed more time, that the fit was not right." He looked around the table. "We said these things because we could, because no one required us to be more specific, because the system accommodated the vagueness." One board member, Harrison Webb, 61, 3 decades with the company, shifted in his seat. "Gerald," he said, "I understand the purpose of this exercise, but the legal exposure—" "I'm not finished," Gerald said. Webb went quiet. "The legal exposure is real," Gerald said. "Our attorneys are aware. The remediation plan addresses it. But that's not why I'm doing this." He looked at Webb. "I'm doing this because I need the people in this room to hear 31 names, not read a summary, not review a statistical overview. Hear them. Because these decisions were made in rooms like this one, by people like us, and we did not stop to hear the names then. And I think that was the beginning of the problem." The room was very still. "The remediation plan will be distributed this afternoon," Gerald continued. "It includes compensation review, formal promotion consideration, and direct outreach to each individual. Some of them no longer work for us. We will reach out regardless." He closed the folder. "This is not the end of this conversation," he said. "It's the beginning of it. I want to be very clear about that." He looked around the table one more time. Webb did not push back again. No one did. Naomi received the final audit report from Meridian Consulting on the same Wednesday afternoon that Gerald presented to the board. Patricia sent it directly, per the terms of the agreement, full report, unredacted. Naomi sat at her desk and read it, all of it. When she finished, she looked out her window at Lexington Avenue below. The afternoon traffic, the people moving on the sidewalk, a delivery truck blocking the right lane, a woman with a red coat and headphones walking fast and looking at her phone. Ordinary afternoon, ordinary city. She thought about Gerald in a conference room reading 31 names. She thought about Colton in the Bronx on a Saturday morning, with no phone and no plan to post about it. She thought about Brielle in Detroit, 5 times now, with a small camera and 412,000 followers, who were learning something new about what she was made of. She thought about Officer Dwight Keene, who had called her back and said yes. She thought about her father, who had driven to a museum at 9:30 p.m. on a Friday, because his daughter had answered the phone. And she thought about Diana Hargrove, who had not attended the training, who had not gone anywhere, who was still somewhere in a house in Manhattan, navigating whatever it was she was navigating. Separate from the process, separate from the change. Not separate forever maybe, but separate now. And that was a problem for another day. Because real change did not arrive all at once. It did not arrive complete. It did not arrive on a schedule. It arrived in 31 names being read out loud in a conference room. It arrived in a woman flying to Detroit 5 times in 4 months. It arrived in a security officer who quit and then said yes to a phone call, and then said yes to a harder thing. It arrived in pieces, imperfect ones. And Naomi Carter had learned in the 91 days since a woman in a burgundy gown tore her invitation in 2, that you could not require it to arrive faster or cleaner or more completely than it was capable of arriving. You could only create the conditions, and wait, and watch, and hold the line. 8 months is a long time. Long enough for a company to begin the work of becoming something different. Long enough for a family to fracture along lines that were always there, just never tested. Long enough for a young woman to stop waking up at 3 a.m., replaying a Friday evening she had not chosen but could not return. 8 months after the gala, the Hargrove Capital Quarterly Review landed on Naomi's desk at Carter Foundation. Patricia had forwarded it per the terms of the agreement. 22 pages. Clean formatting. The numbers on page 3 stopped her. Minority leadership representation, up from 4% to 19. Not 31, not the target, but 19, which was 15 points higher than 8 months ago, which was real. She read the whole report. Then she set it on her desk and looked out the window at Lexington Avenue, and thought about Gerald Hargrove sitting alone in his home office at 3 a.m. writing 23 names into a document that no one had asked him to write. She thought about that man, Earl, 47 years old, apologizing for taking up space in a room in the Bronx. She thought about Brielle in Detroit, 5 visits in, asking a program director if she could bring a camera. She thought about Officer Dwight Keene, who had called back and said yes. Real change did not arrive all at once. She knew that now in a way she had not known it the night she stood on cold marble, holding 2 halves of a torn invitation. That night she had understood it intellectually. 8 months of watching it actually happen had given her something more than understanding. It had given her patience that was not passive. The active working patience of someone who knew the difference between a thing that was growing and a thing that was performing growth. The Hargroves were growing. Imperfectly. Unevenly. Diana still had not attended a single training session. That was its own problem, being handled separately, quietly, by Gerald's attorneys in consultation with Carter Foundations. The probationary agreement had language for exactly this contingency, but the rest of the family was doing the work, not because they had been filmed, not anymore, because somewhere in the past 8 months each of them had found, in their own way and at their own pace, a reason that had nothing to do with cameras or consequences. That was the thing you could not fake. Naomi had been watching for it, and it was there. She pulled out a notepad. She wrote 1 line at the top of the page. Summit. 1 year, Caldwell. Same room. She looked at the line for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called her father. The Corporate Accountability Summit took 4 months to plan. Naomi ran point on the logistics while managing her regular foundation work, which meant she was working at a pace that would have concerned most people who knew her, if most people who knew her had not long since accepted that this was simply how she operated. She did not sprint. She did not burn. She moved steadily without drama through the things that needed doing. Invitations went to 300 people. Not 250. 300. Specifically business leaders, HR directors, civil rights advocates, community organizers, journalists from across New York. The list was built carefully, not for prestige, for specificity. Every person on that list was either doing the work of institutional change or needed to see what it looked like when it was actually done. Dr. Margaret Voss had offered the Caldwell's main hall before Naomi finished describing the concept. Here, Voss had said, this building, that room. A pause. It should be here, Naomi had said. Good. Just that, which was exactly right. In the month since the gala, Voss had quietly restructured every aspect of the museum's event protocols. New guest verification procedure. New training requirements for all security staff. New escalation procedures for situations involving guests that did not involve calling for removal as a first response. She had done all of this without a press release, without a statement. She had mentioned it to Naomi only once in passing during a planning call. Naomi had noted it and moved on, because the measure of an institution's change was not the announcement. It was the next event, and the one after that, and whether the protocols held when there was no camera, and no lawsuit, and no former security officer named Dwight Keene standing in the training room telling the story of the night he almost did the wrong thing and did not. Keene had been doing that for 6 months. He had joined Carter Foundation's Pressure Compliance Initiative in March, 4 months after the gala. He showed up the first time in a button-down shirt and the careful posture of a man who was not sure yet whether he belonged in the room. Naomi had shaken his hand and introduced him to the program director and left him there. She did not hover. He did not need her to. By May, he was co-facilitating sessions. By July, he had developed his own curriculum unit on what he called the moment of recognition, the specific second in a situation when you understand that what you're being asked to do is wrong, and you have to decide whether that understanding is going to change your behavior or not. He taught it to security professionals, social workers, corporate managers, hospital staff. His unit was the most requested in the program. He was in the audience the night of the summit, near the back. He had declined the invitation to speak. "This one's not mine," he had told Naomi when she asked. "I'll be there. But let the night belong to the people who did the harder thing." She had not pushed, because she understood what he meant. Dwight Keene's arc was real and important and ongoing. But tonight was about accountability and transformation at the institutional level. His story was the story of what one person does when they recognize something in themselves and choose differently. That story was being told every week in his curriculum. Tonight was not the night for it. Tonight was for the Hargroves, and for the 31 names, and for a room that had once been a circle of cruelty becoming something else. The room filled early. By 6:45, 300 people had found seats at the round tables with white linen. The same string quartet was in the same corner. The same chandeliers caught the same light from the same high ceiling. The iron doors were open on Fifth Avenue, and October air moved through them the way October air does in New York, cool and specific, carrying the particular smell of the city in the season between summer heat and winter cold. But the room was not the same room. Last year it had been performance, calculated and beautiful and entirely self-regarding. A room of people managing their own images in real time, arranging themselves for the social photograph they would carry away. There had been nothing wrong with the chandeliers, or the white linen, or the string quartet. The wrongness had been underneath all of it, invisible, ordinary. The ordinary wrongness that sits beneath beautiful surfaces in rooms like this one, all across this city every single night, without anyone being required to look at it. Tonight people were looking at each other, not performing looking, actually looking, leaning in, listening before responding, taking up their seats and staying in them and being present in a way that a charity gala very specifically does not require. Dr. Adrienne Foss arrived at 6:50 and found her seat near the front. She had been asked to speak. She had agreed on the condition that she could say what was true. Naomi had said, "Those are the same condition tonight." Judge Loretta Whitfield came alone and took a seat near the left aisle. She had been part of the planning from the beginning. It was her idea to build the evening around testimony rather than presentation, because she had spent 30 years understanding that a report could be filed away and a testimony could not. Gerald Hargrove arrived with Colton and Brielle at 7 minutes to 7. They found their seats at a table near the center. Not the center, near it. Gerald had specifically requested a table that was not prominent. Naomi had honored that. Diana was not with them. She had not been with them at the bias training. She had not been with them at the audit presentations. She had hired her own attorney, who had communicated on her behalf throughout the probationary process, and she had technically complied with the minimum requirements of the agreement while making it very clear, through every channel available to her, that her compliance was strategic rather than genuine. There was a word for this. Gerald knew the word. He had said it to Naomi 3 months ago in one of their quarterly check-in calls, in the careful language of a man choosing honesty over protection. She's managing the situation, he had said. She's not changing. Naomi had said nothing. I don't know how to make her change, he said. You can't, Naomi said. That's not how it works, then what do I do? You keep doing what you're doing, she said. And you let the agreement hold her accountable where accountability is possible and everything else. She paused. Everything else is between her and her own conscience. You can't do that work for her. Gerald had been quiet for a moment. I know, he said. The same 2 words he had said to Elliot Carter 12 months ago, standing in the Caldwell Museum with his phone in his jacket pocket and his wife tearing an invitation out of a stranger's hand. I know. Except this time the knowing was different. This time it was not the confession of a man caught in his own silence. It was the acknowledgement of a man who had been sitting with a hard truth long enough to have made some peace with the parts of it he could not control. Diana was not in the room. The seat where she would have sat was empty. Dr. Foss had noted it when she came in. Judge Whitfield had noted it. Several other attendees had noted it and said nothing because nothing needed to be did. The empty seat said everything. It said, this is what it looks like when a person decides that the work of becoming is not worth the cost of the discomfort. It said, accountability has limits. It said, you cannot require transformation from people who have decided they are not the ones who need to transform. The empty seat would come up later, not by name, but it would come up. At 7 o'clock, Naomi walked to the podium. She was wearing black. Simple dress, low heels, the same small gold earrings. Every person in the room who had been at the gala 12 months ago recognized her immediately, not because she was making a statement, but because she was the same woman she had always been. And some people carry their consistency so completely that a room feels it before it consciously registers. A small ripple moved through the crowd. Not applause. Something quieter. The particular collective exhale of people recognizing something they had been waiting for, without knowing they were waiting. She stood at the podium. She looked at the room. A year ago, she said, I was standing about 30 feet from where I'm standing now, and someone took something out of my hands and tore it in half. She let that sit. I've thought a lot about what to do with that. Because there are things you can do when someone tears something of yours in half in front of 250 people. Some of those things feel good in the short term. None of the ones that feel good in the short term are particularly useful in the long term. Several people in the crowd nodded. I wanted something useful, she said. So that's what tonight is. Not a celebration. Not a vindication. A reckoning. Honest and specific and uncomfortable in the places where it needs to be uncomfortable. She stepped back from the podium slightly. The floor belongs to the people who did the work, she said. Let's hear from them. Gerald walked to the podium first. He wore a charcoal suit. No notes. No tablet. He had his hands at his sides and his shoulders back, and the posture of a man who had decided that if he was going to stand in front of 300 people and say something that mattered, he was going to say it without anything to hide behind. My name is Gerald Hargrove, he said. I am the CEO of Hargrove Capital, and 12 months ago, I stood in this building and received phone calls from a man whose daughter was being publicly humiliated 15 feet away from me. I declined everyone. The room was still. I knew who was calling, he said. I had enough information to understand what was happening. And I made a calculation. The calculation people make when the cost of acting feels higher than the cost of staying quiet. He looked at the room. All of it. Not at one face. At the whole thing. I want to tell you what that cost, he said. Not in financial terms. In human ones. He spoke for 18 minutes. He covered the audit findings. Not with the practiced efficiency of a CEO delivering a quarterly report. With the specific, unhurried attention of a man who had read 32 pages of a document at 3 a.m. and had not looked away from a single one of them. The promotion disparity 4.1 years average for employees of color versus 2.4 for white employees at the same performance level. The 63 performance reviews flagged for coded language. The 41 times cultural fit appeared as justification for a decision that was never defined. And then he said the names. 31 of them. He had them on a single piece of paper, but he did not look at it often. He had learned these names, he had read their files. He knew their tenure dates and their performance ratings and the specific language used to explain why each of them had not moved forward when the numbers said they should have. He read all 31. The room listened in a silence that was not passive. It was the silence of people doing something, processing, reckoning. Some of them knew some of those names, people who had worked alongside those employees, people who had sat in rooms where those promotion decisions were made and had told themselves there must have been a reason, a good one. The system was fair. It had to be fair because they believed in it and worked inside it, and their belief in its fairness was part of what made them able to show up every day. Hearing the names made the belief harder to hold, which was exactly why Gerald was saying them. 7 of those people still work for us, he said when he finished the list. We've initiated formal remediation for each of them. Not a form letter, a conversation, compensation review, promotion consideration, direct acknowledgement of what happened and why it was wrong. He folded the paper. The other 24 have left the company. We've reached out to all of them. 11 have responded and are in active discussions with us. The other 13 have not responded. That is their right. He paused. I don't expect applause, he said. This is not an accomplishment. This is the beginning of repairing something that should not have needed repairing. I want to be precise about that distinction because it matters. He looked up one more time. 1 year ago tonight I chose silence when silence had a cost. I am not going to stand here and tell you I have finished paying that cost. I am going to tell you that I know what it is and I intend to keep paying it, for as long as it takes. He stepped back. Dr. Foss stood from her front row seat and began to clap. Not quickly, slowly, with the weight of someone who had been watching carefully and had decided this deserved a response. Others joined, not all at once, one by one. The sound that built was not celebratory. It was something more serious. The sound of people deciding that what they had just witnessed was real enough to respond to and choosing to respond. Colton came next. He had no notes either. He wore a dark jacket and a plain shirt. No performance in his appearance. Just himself, which was something he had been working on for 12 months, with the specific difficulty of a person who had built an entire identity around performance, and was trying to find out what was underneath it. I have a TikTok account, he said. 2.3 million followers as of this morning. A slight shift in the crowd. A year ago it had 80,000, he said. Most of the growth happened because of a video I posted from this building. A video in which I filmed a woman being publicly humiliated and provided commentary on it. For entertainment. Because that was what I did. He stopped. When the video started climbing, when I watched the number go from 8,000 to 80,000 in real time, I felt good. Not guilty. Good, because I had confused the number going up with doing something worthwhile. He looked at the audience. They are not the same thing. I know that now. I did not know it then. Or I knew it, and had decided it did not apply to me, which is a different and more honest way of describing what was happening. He nodded to someone in the back of the room. A screen behind the podium came to life. He had edited a 7-minute piece. It opened with his original footage from the gala, unedited, his voice on it. His commentary, his face in the moments the camera caught it entertained watching a show, narrating a show he was also producing in real time. Then it cut. A room in the Bronx. Saturday morning. A man named Earl, 47 years old, sitting at a table at a mock interview workshop, talking about where he had been and what he was building and what he needed people to understand about him when he walked into a room. Colton's voice, off camera and quieter. What do you want people to know when you walk through a door? Earl looked at the camera for a moment. That I earned what I have, he said. That I worked for it, and that I deserve to be wherever I am. Cut back to the gala footage. Naomi on the marble floor, picking up the torn pieces. Slow, unhurried, completely composed. Colton's voice again different from the original. I filmed her doing that and I thought it was a punchline. I didn't understand that I was watching someone do exactly what Earl was describing. She knew she deserved to be there. She never stopped knowing it. Not for 1 second of the time I had a camera pointed at her face. The screen went dark. I am not a changed person, Colton said. I want to be honest about that. I'm a person in the middle of changing, which is slower and less comfortable and less filmable than transformation. But it's what I actually have. He stepped back. Brielle spoke next, and she had nothing prepared. She walked to the podium with empty hands and spoke for 11 minutes. She talked about Detroit, about going 5 times before she brought a camera, about the decision not to post the first 4 visits, and what that felt like, the strange quiet of doing something that no one was watching, the way that quiet turned out to be the most clarifying thing she had experienced in years. She talked about the 14-minute video and reading 400 comments in 4 hours, and what was different about that experience compared to every previous engagement she had built her platform on. She talked about losing $700,000 in brand contracts in 11 days. She said the number out loud because she had noticed that conversations about accountability tended to stay vague about cost, and she thought the vagueness was a way of making accountability sound painless, and it was not painless, and she wanted that on record. I lost followers, she said, and I gained something I still don't have the right word for, something that feels like ground instead of surface. She looked at the audience. I went to Detroit last week, she said. I'm going again in 3 weeks. It has not become easy. I still drive home some days feeling like I have no idea what I'm doing there. And then I think about a woman standing in this room for a very long time and not moving. And I think she didn't know how it was going to end either. She just held her position. She stepped back. The room held what she had said for a moment before Dr. Foss stood again. She did not go to the podium. She stood from her seat and turned to face the room, which was both less formal and more direct the way she had chosen it to be. I want to say something about progress, she said, because I've been watching it carefully and I want to be precise. She looked at the Hargrove table. Gerald, Colton, Brielle, what I've seen is real, she said. I know how to look for the real thing and I know how to spot the performance of it. What these 3 people have been doing for the past 12 months is not a performance. She looked at the rest of the room. And I've also seen what hasn't changed, she said. There are 31 people whose careers were shaped by decisions this company made using language designed to protect the people making those decisions from scrutiny. Remediation is happening. But remediation is not erasure. Those years happened. Those people built different lives than they would have built. That is a fact that doesn't disappear because the people responsible are doing the work of accountability now. She paused. There is also someone who is not in this room tonight. The room understood without being told. The empty seat at the Hargrove table. Diana. I'm not going to characterize her absence, Dr. Foss said. What I will say is this. The space that absence represents the space where someone has decided that the work of changing is not applicable to them, that space exists in every institution and every family and every room in this city. And it does not disappear because the people around it are growing. It persists, and it requires a different kind of patience than everything else we've discussed tonight. The patience of people who cannot control whether someone changes, but can control whether they continue to do their own work regardless. She looked at Gerald when she said the last part. He held her gaze and did not look away. Judge Loretta Whitfield came to the podium next. She was 65 tonight. The same green dress, different shade. The same watch. The same posture of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms where things that mattered were decided and had never once lost her bearing in any of them. I recorded 44 minutes of video on my phone a year ago, she said. I've watched it several times since then. Not for legal purposes. For the same reason you look at something when you're trying to understand it. She folded her hands. What I keep returning to is not the dramatic moments. Not the invitation being torn. Not the family's reaction when the truth became clear. It's a 7-minute stretch in the middle. When Naomi Carter stood on that floor with a torn invitation in her hand, and she did not cry, did not argue, did not explain herself to a crowd that had already decided it knew who she was. She looked at Naomi. In 30 years on the bench, I have seen people respond to injustice in many ways. Rage, silence, negotiation, retreat. I've seen all of it. What I saw in those 7 minutes I have one word for, and it is not a legal word. She paused. Dignity, she said. Not performed, not strategic, just present, intact. As though nothing in that room had the authority to take it from her, because nothing in that room did. She looked at the audience. You can show people what that looks like, she said. You can show them what it looks like when it's real, and then you can ask them to consider what they would have to let go of inside themselves to have access to it. That question is what tonight is for, among other things. She stepped back. Then it was Naomi's turn. She walked back to the podium and the room was quiet in the way it gets when a group of people has been holding a great deal together for a sustained period and is now sitting at the edge of the thing they came for. She looked at the room for a moment. I want to tell you something I haven't said publicly, she said. The attention in the room shifted forward. The night of the gala, she said, I was not calm because I was brave. I was calm because I had decided before I walked through those doors that nothing that happened inside this building was going to move me from myself. She paused. That sounds simple. It was not simple. It was a decision I had to make and remake about every 45 seconds for close to 30 minutes. Every time someone said something. Every time a phone went up. Every time the circle got smaller. She looked at the audience. Because what that crowd was doing, and I don't think most of them understood they were doing, it was not trying to humiliate me. It was trying to get me to forget who I was. To make me respond in a way that confirmed their version of me. To make me small or angry or tearful or defensive. To perform the role they had assigned. She folded her hands on the podium. I had one job, she said. To not perform their role, to stay in mine. She looked around. That is what I want to leave you with tonight. Not the conditions I set. Not the audit. Not the numbers. Though the numbers matter, and I'm glad they exist. What I want you to carry out of this room is simpler than all of that. She stopped, long enough for the room to lean in. Know who you are before you walk through the door. Know it clearly. Hold it. Because there will always be someone ready to hand you a different story about yourself. And you do not have to take it. You do not have to argue with it. You just have to know it isn't yours. She looked down at the podium, then back up. And when someone takes something from your hands, she said, and they tear it, and they let it fall like it means nothing, pick it up. Slowly. With your full name and your full self intact. Because what they destroyed is a piece of paper. What you're carrying is something else entirely. She stepped back. The silence that followed held for 3 full seconds. Long enough to have weight. Long enough that it was its own kind of response. Then it broke. Not with noise but with movement. People rising from their seats one by one and then in clusters, not to perform anything. Just because they were moved and needed to be standing in the presence of what they had just heard. Naomi watched them stand. She did not cry. She moved off the stage and through the room, stopping for each person who needed a moment with her. A woman running a non-profit facing something similar in her organization, needing to know it was survivable. A man who had managed a team for 15 years and was asking himself, for the first time, what his silence had cost the people who worked for him. A young woman who said nothing at all but looked at Naomi with something in her face that was not yet language but was moving toward it. She held each conversation for as long as it needed. Across the room, near the back, Dwight Keane stood with a glass of water and watched. He had been watching all evening. He had arrived early and found a seat at a corner table where he could see the whole room without being in the center of it. He was in his late 40s now. A few months passed when he had handed in his badge, and he still held himself with the careful posture of a security professional, even though he was no longer one. He watched Gerald read 31 names and thought about his own name, which would never be in a list like that, but which had almost become the name of the man who removed Naomi Carter from a charity gala at a powerful family's request. Almost. He was still sitting with the almost. He thought he would be sitting with it for a while yet. That seemed right to him. Some things should not be resolved quickly. Gerald caught his eye from across the room at one point during the evening. Just briefly. Gerald nodded. Keane nodded back. That was all. That was enough. The room began to empty around 10. People moved toward the iron doors in groups, lingering, extending conversations they did not want to end because the conversations were doing something useful and they knew it. The servers began clearing the far tables. The string quartet packed their instruments. Dr. Voss stood near the corridor to her office, speaking with 3 attendees at once, her tablet under her arm, her expression, the expression of a woman who had spent 12 months restructuring her institution and was now standing in the evidence of why it had mattered. Patricia had stayed for the full event. She sat near the back and did not draw attention to herself, which was what she always did, and she had her tablet open and her notes running, because that was also what she always did. And Elliot Carter was going to ask her for a summary in the morning, and the summary was going to need to capture something that was harder to summarize than quarterly financials. She was working on the language. Gerald and his children were the last guests at their table. Colton was on his phone, not filming, texting, the kind of rapid exchange that looked like he was coordinating something rather than consuming. Brielle sat with her hands around a glass of water, watching the room empty, her face in the specific configuration of someone who had experienced something and was not ready yet to convert it into a caption. Gerald sat still. He had been sitting still for most of the evening, listening, not managing, not calculating the room or positioning the narrative or running the internal CEO calculus that was his default mode in any gathering of more than 10 people, just listening. He had read 31 names tonight in front of 300 people. He had done it once before, in the conference room on the 34th floor, in front of 12 board members. But this was different. This was not a board. This was a room of people who were not obligated to receive what he was saying, who had come because they chose to come, who had listened because they chose to listen, and they had listened. That was not nothing. He thought about Diana, not with anger. He had moved past anger a few months ago, which surprised him, because he had expected the anger to stay. Instead, what remained was something more complicated and more quiet. A clear-eyed assessment of 31 years of a marriage and what those years had built and what they had cost, and what, if anything, was worth salvaging from the wreckage. He did not have an answer yet. He suspected he was not going to have one for some time. That was also something he was learning to sit with. The not knowing. The understanding that some things do not resolve on a corporate timeline. That some reckoning does not come with a completion date. Brielle put her hand briefly on his arm. He looked at her. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him for a moment with something in her face that was both very young and very old. The way faces look when a person has recently understood something they were not prepared to understand. He put his hand over hers for a second. Then Colton said, "Ready?" Gerald looked at his son, his daughter. This family that was fractured and incomplete and doing its imperfect, genuine work. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go." They left. Naomi stood near the east window after the last of the guests had gone. The room was almost empty. Servers moving through with quiet efficiency. The chandelier still lit. The marble floor catching the light the same way it had caught it 12 months ago. Indifferent and cold and beautiful and permanent. Elliot Carter came to stand beside her. They stood together without speaking for a moment. The particular silence of two people who know each other well enough that silence between them is its own form of conversation. "You okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "That was something," he said. "It was," she said, a pause. "You ready?" She looked at the room, the last server pushing a cart toward the kitchen. The string quartet's empty corner. The Carter Foundation placard on table 7, near the east window, third from the left, catching the chandelier light the way it always had. "Not yet," she said. So he waited. When the servers were done and the room was empty, and the Caldwell Museum was returning to the quiet version of itself that existed between the events that filled it, Naomi walked back to the center of the floor. She knew the spot without counting steps. Her body knew it. She had thought about this spot on and off for 12 months. Not obsessively, not painfully. The way you think about a place that was significant, that marked something, that your memory has filed under important rather than under difficult. She stood on it. She looked down at the marble floor. Then she reached into her clutch. She had kept the 2 pieces of the torn invitation for the entire 12 months. Not framed, not displayed. In a small envelope in the top drawer of her desk, where she could see it every time she opened the drawer and be reminded, not of what had been done to her, but of what she had chosen to do with it. She took both pieces out, held them in her open palm, side by side. The torn edges almost matching. Carter Foundation. Gold lettering. The Caldwell crest split and rejoined. She looked at them for a while. The pieces were just paper. She had always known that. But they had been something else, too. They had been a record. Evidence. Proof of a thing held close to the body, so the body would not forget when the mind wanted to move on. She did not need them the same way anymore. She closed her fingers around them. Then she opened her hand again, and she put them back in the clutch. She was going to keep them. Not because she needed to, because they were hers. Because a woman in a burgundy gown had torn something that belonged to her, and she had picked it up from a cold marble floor with her full dignity intact. And she was going to keep it for as long as she chose to keep it, and she was going to decide when to let it go, and that decision was going to be hers. That was how it had always been going to end. On her own terms, she looked up. Elliot was standing near the east window, watching her from across the empty room. He had his hands in his jacket pockets, and his weight evenly distributed the way it always was. and he was looking at his daughter with an expression she recognized and had always recognized, because he had been looking at her that way since she was small enough to fit entirely in the crook of one arm. She walked toward him, across the marble floor, past table 7, past the Carter Foundation placard. She touched it briefly as she went by, the way you touch something that exists and that you want to acknowledge exists, and kept walking. She reached her father. He looked at her face. "You good?" he said. "Yeah," she said. "Good good or regular good," she said. He nodded. They walked out together through the empty hall, past the quiet kitchen, past the coat check where an attendant had smiled at Naomi 12 months ago when she came in alone in a black dress with no escort and no plan to explain herself to anyone. Through the iron doors. Outside, the city was doing what it always did. Cabs and buses and someone's voice carrying from somewhere across the street. The smell of October. The specific quality of Manhattan at 10 in the evening, which was neither loud nor quiet, but somewhere precisely between the two. They walked down the steps of the Caldwell Museum and onto Fifth Avenue. Naomi looked up at the building for a moment. The stone columns. The iron doors behind them now. The lights still on inside, chandeliers visible through the high windows. Then she looked forward. The city stretched out ahead, going about its business without waiting for her, which was exactly what she needed it to do. She walked into it.